Thanks for coming back for session 2. It occurred to me during the break that I didn't do something that I normally do, and this is usually helpful so you have some context in terms of who I'm talking about. I didn't tell you about my family, so let me just do that real quick so you kind of know who they are. My wife Wendy and I have been married for almost 23 years. And she is the love of my life and definitely the best part of the package, without a doubt. She is selfless and sacrificial and she's just a great lady. She's a stay-at-home mom and pretty much runs things at the house so that I can do stuff like this, and is my number one biggest fan and prayer supporter, and texts me throughout the day, hope your sessions go good tonight, praying for you, as you speak. And so that's my wife, Wendy, of 23 years. And I have 3 kids. My daughter, Tatum, is 20. She'll be 21 in December, and she lives in Birmingham. And then we have twin boys that are in the 7th grade, Preston and Spencer. And they're not identical, but they look almost identical, but have very differing personalities. And then our 2.5-year-old golden doodle, Murphy, who is the most spoiled individual in our household, without a doubt. So that's our crew. So just so you kind of know, as I mention names during our time together, you'll kind of know who I'm talking about. So let's talk about communication. Here's what Psalm 19:14 says. I really love this verse of Scripture. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Communication matters. What we say and how we say it matters. I've seen in my own life how even if you say the right thing but say it the wrong way, the wrong thing gets communicated. And so the Bible has a lot to say about how, when, and to whom we speak. Here's what I want you to remember. Communication, and you see this on your sheet there, communication is the superhighway on which love travels. Communication is the superhighway on which love travels. In other words, you can say, I love you, 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 but if your communication doesn't convey that, then the other person doesn't experience that love that you think you're expressing. So here's how I teach communication, and this has kind of been in development over the course of the last several years. What I'm going to give you is I want you to envision for just a second, and sometimes I'll pull a whiteboard out, or I might even draw it in your on your sheet. But just envision like a 5-lane superhighway with an on-ramp. Okay, so there's 6 total, but 1 is the on-ramp, and then you've got 5 lanes going in one direction. Okay, that's the superhighway, and each one of those lanes represents a different aspect of communication. So the first one, lane 1, is what I call the on-ramp. Okay, that's the on-ramp. And that on-ramp is what I call the on-ramp of attitude. Here's what the word says, Luke 6:45. The good person out of the good treasure of his heart produces good, and the evil person out of the evil treasure produces evil. For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Matthew 15:18. But what comes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart, and this defiles a person. Proverbs 16:23. The heart of the wise makes his speech judicious and adds persuasiveness to his lips. And then Philippians 4:8. Finally, brothers, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is anything excellent, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. So here's the thing with the on-ramp of communication, okay? Scores and scores and scores of volumes of books and articles and conferences have been done on communication. And they'll give you every tip, trick, and technique in the book on how to be a better speaker, how to be a better listener, how to communicate better. But at the end of the day, all the tips, tricks, and techniques in the world will not overcome a bad attitude. Because out of the abundance of our heart, our mouth speaks. So frequently in counseling, whenever I'm working with couples and I'm giving them exercises to do and practice exercises to rehearse at home, and we just see that they're not getting anywhere, we're giving them the tips, but things just don't seem to be connecting, they don't seem to be clicking. That's usually because deep down they have resentment, bitterness, unforgiveness, anger, frustration toward their spouse. And at the end of the day, you just can't fake that. If I'm grumpy, if I'm frustrated before I ever begin to communicate, I can try hard to fake that and to try to cover it up, but at the end of the day, it's eventually going to come out. My attitude sets the stage for communication. So, for instance, if you know that there are things in your relationship that need to be talked about, and you know that those are going to be difficult things to talk about, before you ever open your mouth, making sure that you are following the leadership of the Holy Spirit and that you are prayed up and in the right state of mind to have that conversation, that needs to be the very first thing you do before you ever open your mouth. The on-ramp of attitude. Lane number 2, startup. So you know how whenever you're coming out into like a superhighway, usually there's kind of a slower lane. You know, you got to build up some speed before you can actually get out there in the fastest traffic. We call that the startup lane. And honestly, this is where so many couples break down. This is where your own relationship history sets in, and we begin to make some really big assumptions. So John Gottman, who is probably the world's foremost family therapy researcher, is not a believer, but has done tons of research on communication. And in their love lab in the University of Washington, what they have determined is that the first 90 seconds of any conversation will almost always predict how that conversation is going to end, no matter how long the conversation lasts. The first 90 seconds. So if in that first 90 seconds you're loving and kind and compassionate and gracious and giving, then in all likelihood that conversation is going to go well. But if in that first 90 seconds you are mean and grumpy and unforgiving and ungracious, rude, condescending, arrogant, then in all likelihood that conversation is going to end bad. And so one of the things that we have to practice as couples in good communication is just making sure that in that first 90 seconds that we work on having really solid, humble communication in the first 90 seconds that we talk. Because that's going to set the stage for the remainder of our conversation. That is lane 2. Lane number 3. It's what we call styles and levels of communication. Styles and levels of communication. So everybody has their own communication style, right? I mean, some of that's gender-based, some of that's personality-based, right? The average woman, the average man talks about 7,000 words a day. The average woman about 14,000 words a day, with gusts upwards of about 20,000 words a day, just depending upon the woman. Some personalities in communication are just different. Some people tend to be more passive. Some people tend to be more active. Some people tend to be real thinkers and contemplators, and some people just tend to be, they just open up their mouth and they just say what first comes to their mind. They're different styles. So standing in my backyard about, I guess it's been about 8 years ago, standing out of my backyard one night, I was about to throw the baseball for one of the first times with my boys. They were starting T-ball the next day, and so we had gone to academy, we'd bought all the baseball gear, and so we're out in the backyard, and so we're going to start trying to practice to throw baseballs. And one of my twins, Spencer, I throw the ball to him, he catches it in his glove, takes the ball out of his glove, throws the glove on the ground, puts the ball in his glove hand, and throws it back. I was like, Okay, now we don't do that. I mean, take it with that hand and throw it back. And so I throw him another ball. He catches it, takes the ball out, throws the glove on the ground, takes the ball, throws it back to me. I'm like, what is going on? And then it dawned on me. He's left-handed. And so I took both of their gloves away, and I said, look, I'm just going to throw you 10 balls indiscriminately. Just pick them up barehanded and just throw them back to me. And sure enough, determined all 10 balls, Preston threw back with his right hand. All 10 balls, Spencer threw back with his left hand. And so I was like, okay, one's right-handed, one's left-handed. We got to go back to academy. We got to buy new gear. So we go back to academy. We buy new gear. We come back out in the yard the next day, and we start throwing. And I make the second big discovery about my boys in baseball. Preston is a little afraid of the ball. So when you throw the ball to him, he wants you to underhand the ball to him, and he wants to catch the ball like this. Spencer, on the other hand, he loves having the ball thrown to him. He wants you to kind of throw it more overhand and not in a lob, and he wants to catch the ball like this. So if I throw the ball hard and straight at Preston, who likes it like this, he just moves out of the way and the ball goes by him. Spencer, if I throw the ball underhand to him, and he likes to catch the ball like this, if I throw the ball underhand to him, he puts his hand up like this, and the ball falls right in front of him, and he doesn't catch it. So standing out in the yard, this has been 8-9 years ago, I had this epiphany. Their ability to catch the ball has more to do with my ability to throw it than it does their ability to catch it. If I throw it in a way that they can receive it, they'll catch it almost every time. But if I don't throw it correctly, they'll miss it almost every time. Do you know communication is the exact same way? Your ability to throw a message to your partner is more important than their ability to be able to catch that. Because so many times the reason why they don't receive the message is because we don't throw it correctly. Because their style is different than our style. You would probably find this hard to believe. Not really. But I'm the talker of the two between my wife and I. I'm the 25,000 words a day, and she's the 5,000 words a day. And so oftentimes I'll start telling her a story, and eventually she'll just look at me and she'll say, do you have to tell a story? Can you just not tell me what you need to tell? You don't have to give me all the details. Just tell me what you want me to know. And I, on the other hand, I ask her a question, and she gives me the answer, and I'm like, that's all you got? Like, that's it? I mean, like, that's it. Right? You can't talk any more than that. You know, of course, I always pull out my counselor. Tell me a little more about that. You know, I mean, I use my good counselor speak on her until she looks at me and says, I'm not one of your clients. So talk to me like that. We have different styles. We have different styles based on even just our sleep habits. Okay? I mean, I'm kind of a freak of nature. On average, I get 3 to 4 hours of sleep a night. That's on average, 3 to 4 hours of sleep. I usually don't go to bed before 2 a.m. in the morning. I'm usually up by 6. It's just weird. I can't explain it. It's just me. My wife, on the other hand, if she doesn't get a solid 8 hours of sleep, it's ugly. And she'll tell you that. I mean, it's ugly. Like, she's got to get 8 hours of solid sleep. Because I don't get a lot of sleep, I'm not, and I generally, even whenever I get sleep, I tend to like it to be, you know, like in that 2 to 6, 2 to 8, maybe even 4 to 10, you know, kind of time frame. I don't like the mornings. I'm not a morning person. She loves the morning. She's a get up at 5, drink the coffee, do her quiet time, you know, sweep the porch, vacuum, go out, change the oil in the car. You know, I mean, I don't like the mornings. I mean, to me, 5 o'clock, it comes one time a day, and it's in the p.m. It's not in the a.m., okay? But she doesn't like the evenings, okay? She doesn't like late nights. So at 8 o'clock, she's wanting to go to bed. She's wanting to get in the bed. And at 8 o'clock, I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I'm not getting my second wind. I haven't even gotten my first wind at 8. But she wants to be in bed at 8 o'clock. Well, here's why that matters to communication. If I go in our bedroom and sit down on the edge of the bed and it's 9 o'clock and I say, hey, I need to talk to you about something, it's not going to go well. because she's not at her best. She's not. If she comes and wakes me up at 6 o'clock in the morning and says, hey, I need to talk to you about something, I'm likely not even to know who she is. So understand what your spouse's style of communication is. How do they like it? I mean, did they grow up in a family, maybe like in my family growing up, in the Cockrell family, loudest person wins. Okay? So you show up at our house around Christmas and you want to talk to somebody and there's 25 people in the room, you better be loud or you're not going to get heard, right? And so for me, being loud, there's no problem with that at all. But if you didn't grow up in a family where that was, like I remember one of the first times, Dwayne Parker's a dear friend of mine, he's a minister in Flora, Mississippi, and I remember one of the first times Dwayne ever said to me, we were riding down the road, and he said, I can't believe you talk to your mom like that. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, I cannot believe that you talk to your mom in that tone of voice. And I said, what are you talking about? What tone of voice? I would never be that loud with my mom. And I will be honest with you, I didn't think a thing in the world. And whenever I got home that night, I asked my mom, I said, was I sarcastic? Was I disrespectful? She said, what are you talking about? And I said, Dwayne said he never would have talked to his family like that. I thought I'd done something wrong. That was the family that I grew up in. That's our style, okay? Know your spouse's style of communication and get adept at speaking their style. An extension of that would be making sure that when you speak in that style, that you know that there are multiple ways of communicating. You can communicate through your words, you can communicate through your tone of voice, you can communicate through your body language, you can communicate through your actions. Here's what the studies tell us. Only 7% of the communication process is accounted for by the actual words that we say. The other 93% is accounted for by our tone of voice and body language. 55% is accounted for by body language, 38% is accounted for by our tone of voice. So if I go home, if I were at home tonight, if I went home tonight and I walked in and Wendy were at the sink and I walked in and I said, hey honey, how was your day? And she said, fine. And I said, okay. I said, well, I'm going to drop my stuff here and, what are we having for supper? And she said, hamburgers. Are you okay? I'm fine. You don't seem fine. Tate, I said I was fine, and if I'm not fine, I'll let you know, okay? Okay? So, with that illustration, what I can do is I can go in the living room, plop down in my recliner, turn on SportsCenter, and I can kick back and watch TV, right? Because she has said she's fine, there's nothing wrong, and if there is anything wrong, she'll let me know, right? Right. Every guy in this room knows I would be a moron if I did that. Because she said one thing with her mouth and she said another thing with her tone of voice, and by not turning around and looking at me, she said another thing with her body language. With 7% of the communication process, she said there was nothing wrong. And with 93% of the communication process, she said something is wrong, and not only is something wrong, you are likely to blame. Right? So you have to remember that there are multiple ways of communicating. For instance, if you've never read the book, The 5 Love Languages, you ought to read that. You ought to read that book because sometimes we think we're conveying love to our spouse when we're not. We think that we're doing a good job communicating that we love them, but the reality is we're speaking one language of communication and they're speaking another. And so it's like we're speaking Japanese and they're speaking French. And we think we're saying, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you. And our spouse is saying, you don't love me. But we think that we are saying that we love them. The second thing is not only the style, but the level of communication that we use. The level of communication that we use. There's a bunch of different levels, and I just want to hit these really quickly because we don't have a lot of time. The first level is what we would call cliche communication. That cliche communication is exactly what it sounds like. I mean, it's the, hey, how you doing? How's your day? I mean, basically, we're just speaking in cliches. It's about as surface level of communication as you can ever get, okay? The second level of communication is basically the sharing of facts, okay? And honestly, whenever we've been married for a while, there's a good chance that the majority of our communication is going to exist on this level right here. What time are you going to be home? Who's picking up the kids? Can you get some milk from the grocery store? You know, can you pick up the laundry? You know, what time are you going to be home? That's the level of our communication, okay? Third level, we move from cliche to facts to our opinions, where now we're not just sharing information, but we're actually sharing a little more intimate information. This is actually what I think about some fact. This is how I perceive it. This is how I think about that thing that I'm sharing with you. Next level down is when we're then willing to share not only our opinions, which would be how we think about a specific fact, but now emotionally, how does that fact impact us? I'm happy about that. I'm sad about that. I'm frustrated about that. I'm angry about that. We're sharing feelings. And then that last level is the level of honesty and vulnerability. And that's where we can be authentic and transparent and be completely honest about who we are and what we're dealing with at the deepest parts of our lives. There was a study done several years ago. It's probably been about 10 years ago now. There was a study done on the amount of time that couples spend communicating. And they tracked couples who had been married like 10 years or less. And they went all the way back to couples who were dating, engaged, married less than a year, married less than 5 years, married 10 years or more. And they discovered that couples who were dating communicated on average about 7 to 10 hours a week. And we're talking about meaningful communication. This is what I think, this is what I feel, I'm being honest, I'm being transparent. About 7 to 10 hours a week if they were dating. That number dropped whenever they became engaged. And it went from 7 to 10 to about 5 to 7 if they were engaged. It dropped again whenever they got married. And if they had been married less than a year, it dropped down to about an hour per week for couples who had been married a year or less. At the 5-year mark, it dropped down to about 40 minutes a week if they had been married 5 years or less. And when they got to the 10-year mark, the average couple spent, on average, 7 minutes per week in meaningful communication. Now, the first time I ever read that study and saw that stat, I thought, that's crazy. There's no way that's true. And then I evaluated my last few days. And I said, I talked to Wendy for 7 minutes this morning. And then I thought about what we communicated about. And what we communicated about was, what time do you have to be at work? What time are you getting off? Can you go by the grocery store? Did you put money on the kids' lunch account? It was factual, just basically routine, run-of-the-mill, nothing of an opinion, nothing of a feeling, nothing of honesty, openness, transparency, basically just the sharing of facts. And I went back and I tracked the last 3 or 4 days, and then I got worried that maybe I wasn't even going to hit the 7-minute mark. Maybe I wasn't even going to get that much. Evaluate your own marriage and ask yourself the question, when is the last conversation that my spouse and I had that was 10 or 15 minutes where we talked about something that was deep, that was below the level of just a cliche or fact or even an opinion, that we actually shared what we were truly feeling about something. If our marriages are going to be healthy, then we're going to have those times where we delve into those deeper levels of communication. So, style and levels, that's lane 3. Lane 4 is the lane of listening, and I really have to move quickly here. Proverbs 18:13. If one gives an answer before he hears, it is to his folly and shame. Proverbs 18:2. A fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his opinion. Can I read that again? A fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his opinion. We have to be good listeners if we're going to be good communicators. If we don't listen well, we won't send messages well, because the messages that we send won't be based on accurate information because we failed to hear that. So be a good active listener. Can I just hit these for you really quickly? 1, be focused in your attention, okay? The greatest enemy of that today is this, right? Some of you are going to get carpal tunnel syndrome from this motion right here, because you pick your phone up and you look at it. You pick your phone up and you look at it. You can't go more than 2 minutes without picking that thing up to see, oh my gosh, did I miss a tweet or a text or an Instagram or a Facebook message, or did I miss something? Yeah, did I miss an email? Did somebody try to call me? And so in the midst of a conversation, instead of being focused on our partner, we're distracted by the things around us. If you're going to have a conversation, remove the distraction. Somebody said once, and I think it's accurate, the secret to concentration is elimination. If you want to concentrate on one thing, you have to eliminate everything else. So be focused in our attention. Remove any distraction that would prevent you from being able to accurately hear your spouse. Sometimes, again, we go back to our kids. You know, one of the things that we try to institute in our home, and I'd encourage you to do this as well, specifically if you've got small kids, is to get good at telling your kids, if you're in a conversation with your spouse, if they come up, get good at telling your kids, you need to wait until we finish our conversation. Our kids know we don't even say that. We don't even stop our conversation to say that. If our kids come up and we're in a conversation, I just simply put 2 fingers up like this and extend my hand out, and they know that means you need to be quiet, you need to leave, and I'll come get you whenever I'm ready. Now, if you're bleeding, that's fine, but you better be bleeding. Like, you seriously, don't just think you're bleeding, like literally, I better see some blood if you come and interrupt our conversation, right? Remove the distractions, whatever they are, and make sure that your attention is focused. Clarify. If your spouse says something that you don't understand, then clarify that. Ask a question. You know, I didn't understand what you meant there, or I didn't hear that correctly. Make sure you clarify that. Observe them as they're talking. That's that whole 7%, 38%, 55%. Watch them. Don't just listen to them with their ears. Watch them. You know what one of the biggest hindrances is to listening today is that when we talk, we do it in separate rooms. So you can't see the other person. Or, God forbid, the thing that's become, so popular in homes today is we don't even talk. We just text each other. You're sitting on one end of the couch and I'm sitting on the other end of the couch, and we'll just text each other, right? You don't know body language, tone of voice, intuition. You have none of that through digital media, okay? And so when you're listening, make sure that you're removing those distractions, you're clarifying, but then you're also looking at your spouse to see, are they listening? Are they engaged? Are they looking at me? Are their eyes connecting with me? We have to make sure that we observe. Reflect. Give back to them what they're saying to make sure that we heard it correctly. Did I hear you say this? Am I sure that this is what I heard you say? To make sure that we actually know what it is. And I'm going to teach you a little trick here, guys, specifically for you in just a second. And then learn to ask open-ended questions. Just learn to ask questions that gets your partner talking. Now, just really quickly here, guys, I'm about to make you a genius, okay? I mean, ladies, you probably already do this, so you probably already know this, so you don't have to listen. But guys, most of you stink at listening, okay? I mean, I just know that because most guys just stink at listening. Not all of them. Some of you may be great at it, but a lot of guys aren't very good at listening, okay? So I'm going to teach you a skill that's going to convey to your partner that you are listening and is going to get them to continue to talk to you in a way that will be positive. And it's called the mirroring response. It's a first year, every counselor learns this trick, okay? And that is when your spouse is talking to you and they say something to you, you simply repeat exactly back what they just said. Word for word, okay? literally word for word. So your spouse says, I can't believe that my boss said blah, 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 and it makes me so angry whenever he does that, and then you simply repeat back, it really makes you angry when your boss says blah, 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 blah. And all you did was just say the exact same thing back. And immediately what she's going to do is she's going to say, yes, that's exactly right. You understand me so much. Oh, you get me, right? Or when you do that, what she's going to say is, well, no, it's not that I'm so much angry as it is that I'm frustrated or that I'm hurt or whatever. It's a basic counseling technique to help individuals feel heard and connected with, and they will clarify their message when you do that. Get adept. Men, women, if you don't do that, do it as well. Get adept at the mirroring response. It will absolutely help you in your listening. Okay, I got to move really quickly here, okay? Lane 5, emotional reactivity. Proverbs 15:1 says this. Proverbs 15:1, a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Psalm 141:3, set a guard, O Lord, over my mouth. Keep watch over the door of my lips. Proverbs 12:18, there is one whose rash words are like sword thrusts, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. Proverbs 19:11, good sense makes one slow to anger, and it is his glory to overlook an offense. And then Ephesians 4:29, let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as good for building up one as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear. Listen, when communication goes bad and there's a difference or there's a disagreement, in unhealthy couples, we have what's called emotional reactivity. You don't have to know this word. I'm just going to tell it to you. It's something that John Gottman discovered years ago in the Love Lab in his marriage and family therapy research, but he calls it negative affect reciprocity. And what that means is in unhealthy couples, if you envision like a scale here in the middle of the room that measures from 1 to 100, and it measures negative emotions. In unhealthy couples, if the husband, say, comes in on that scale and he comes in at a 10, in an unhealthy couple, she'll try to trump his 10 with a 20. And then when she tries to trump his 10 with a 20, he'll try to trump her 20 with a 30. And they'll go straight up through the top of that scale until eventually somebody pulls out the nuclear bomb, which is something like you're just like your mother. And all bets are off at that point. Somebody's hit the red button, right, and said whatever is that one thing that they know will absolutely end the argument. That's emotional reactivity, okay? For just a second, let me just set aside all the science behind that, okay? For just a second, let me set aside all the science behind that and just say this. That process of that scale is sinful. I don't know any other way to say it. The process of that scale where we fail to sacrifice and overlook and put a guard on our lips is an affront to our spouse and to our God. Having said that, aside from the fact that it is an offense to our spouse and to our God, it is tremendously detrimental to our relationships. And it does not work. We tend to think that the more reactive we get and the louder we get and the more engaged we get negatively in the relationship, the more our spouse is going to understand and feel and get and change, and it almost never works. And why on earth, and I say this to myself because for a long time I did this, why on earth we continue to rehearse and practice those same behaviors over and over and over and over again when they don't work is beyond me. But couples will do that. And they'll just ramp up that scale, each one trying to say something worse than the other, until eventually somebody says something that they can't take back and that their spouse is never going to forget. And then that's a brick in between that husband and that wife that at some point they're going to have to go back and tear down. So I teach all my couples that come to me for marriage counseling, I teach all of them this 5-word phrase. It's very simple to memorize. It's very hard to do. That 5-word phrase is this: do the next right thing. Do the next right thing. All of those verses that I read you, that's the central principle behind those 5 words. No matter what your spouse does, no matter what they say, no matter how they react, we are always called to do the next right thing. Let me give you the example of that. So many times when couples come in for counseling, we hear these types of things. Well, I wouldn't have said that if she wouldn't have said that. Well, I wouldn't have said that if he wouldn't have said that. Well, I said that because she said that. And I usually at that point, kind of sarcastically and somewhat funny, I usually jump in and say, what are you guys, in the 5th grade? I mean, that's a 5th grade argument. I did this because you did that. That's a 5th grader does that, okay? We're all adults. And let me be just very lovingly, aggressively humble here by saying one day, think about this, one day, we are all going to stand before God, and we are going to give an account of our life. We're going to give an account for all those words. And they're going to go into a fire, and they're going to be tried, the Apostle Paul says. And on the other side of that fire, they're either going to come out as wood, hay, and stubble and be burned up, or they're going to come out the other side as gold, silver, and precious stones. And my fear is, and in our communication a lot of times, they're going to be burned up because we don't do the next right thing. Do the next right thing. Lastly, and then we're going to be done, I promise. Sorry, I'm keeping you long. That's emotional reactivity. Last one is, how do you resolve difficult issues? How do you resolve difficult issues? That negative affect reciprocity, that's just what we talked about with that scale. Learning how to not do that, to be reactive. Avoiding criticism. You know, our partners are going to do stuff that's wrong. We're going to make mistakes. We're all human. And look, I spend a lot of time helping couples understand this, that over the lifetime of your marriage, it's all going to kind of work out in the end. I mean, at the end of the day, sometimes you're going to be to blame, sometimes your spouse is going to be to blame. And over the lifetime of your marriage, maybe one of you is going to be to blame 60%, the other one's going to be 40%, or maybe it's going to be 55-45. But at the end of the day, it's going to be about equal on who is to blame. But at the end of the day, resolving difficult issues is not about winning. It's not about winning the argument, and it's certainly not about winning the blame game. Because so many times when we have difficult issues, it's about who can I put this on? Whose fault is this? Rick Warren said one time, and I thought it was a great quote, he said, you can't fix the problem if you're so busy trying to fix the blame. Because that's not the issue. Because when we're trying to fix the blame, we're not actually talking about the issue. Here's what I see in couples. Couples will get into an argument, and they'll start down that road of saying all those negative things. And let's just use this example. Maybe you and your spouse are fighting about whose house you're going to go to for Christmas this year. It's a very popular argument that I deal with in counseling. We're going to the in-laws' house, we're going to my parents' house, we spent last year with your parents, and why do we always have to go to my parents? That kind of argument. So you're having that argument, well then somebody criticizes. And what a criticism is when we attack the individual, not attack the problem. So instead of saying, well, it really bothers me that you did this, what we end up saying is, you do that because you're selfish. You do that because you don't give. Why do you always have to be so mean? Why do you always have to be so rude? Why do you feel like you always have to get your own way? The next thing you know, it turns into this blame game where we're criticizing character traits and the argument goes off the rails. Learn to avoid criticism. Learn to say how you feel. Learn to say what bothers you, but learn to do that without assassinating the character of your spouse. Because at the end of the day, there's going to come a time when you want your spouse to do the same thing for you. Because we're human beings. And we're all selfish. And we're all going to have those moments where we're going to do those things. Learn what the triggers are in your relationship. Learn what most of us, again, this is a John Gottman thing, and I think he's right. This will be the last thing, and I promise I'm going to let you go. Listen to this. Maybe this will set some of you free, okay? Research shows the majority of married couples all have about 10 things that they're going to fight about until the day they die. I'm dead serious. They all have about 10 things, maybe 7, maybe 8, maybe 10, but on average about 10 things that they're going to fight about till the day they die. And you know why? Because they're what we call issues of personality. Okay? Classic example, I use it every marriage conference. Okay? And it's Wendy and I. I grew up in a household where everything had its place. My mom was OCD, clean freak. You couldn't play with one toy till you put another toy up. Growing up in my house, you couldn't sit on a bed after it had been made up. Beds are meant to be slept in, not sat on. I mean, it was a very organized household. So when I got married, what I thought was, and this is going to be so awesome, I'm going to get married, and I'm not going to have somebody fussing at me about me leaving my shoes out, or me not making up my bed, or wrinkling up my bed, or leaving my dirty clothes on the floor. This is going to be so awesome. I'm finally going to be free of all this. And the only problem is that my wife was like my mom on crack. Because my wife is not OCD, okay? My wife is CDO because she can't stand the fact that OCD isn't alphabetized, okay? She's that level of organization. So for the first several years that we were married, she said things like this: "You don't love me because you leave your shoes out next to your chair. Or you don't throw the Coke can away after you finish drinking your Coke, or you leave the dish in the sink. You don't love me because that's important to me, and it's not important to you." And I would respond, "You don't love me because to you, all of those things are more important than us getting along." And so we argued about that all the time. Here's the thing. My personality is my personality. And my wife, she can't be like me. She can't. She can't be that laid back. She can't be that easygoing. She just can't. As hard as she tries, she just can't. And I can't, no matter how hard I try. I could never be as organized as my wife. I could do everything in my power to do it. It will never happen. That is never going to be me. Here's the other interesting thing about our relationship. When Wendy and I first married, when we were even dating, I loved the fact that she was OCD. Because everything was always in its place. She always looked the part. I mean, there was never a hair out of place. She looked the part all the time. I mean, I loved it. And she loved the fact that I wasn't OCD, because when her anxiety level went up, I was the one who calmed that down. But we did what many couples do. Opposites attract, right? But opposites attract, and then they attack to try to get the other person to change to be what they are. So what's happened in the last 23 years? Well, in the last 23 years, I've learned to be more like her. And in the last 23 years, she's learned to be more like me. So on the scale of OCD-ness, if you will, if this is none and this is a lot, she started out way out here and I started out way down here. And in 23 years of marriage, she's moved to about here, and I've moved to about here. Okay? And guess what? See that? There's still that much difference. Okay? But because we've each done this, I'm much more forgiving when she gets frustrated by my lack of organization, and she's much more forgiving when my lack of organization impacts her. And so we've learned to appreciate that about each other. How do you handle differences and difficulties? You realize that you're always going to have them, and honestly, part of our sanctification is learning how to deal with those things. I'm convinced that's the reason why God does that. I'm convinced the reason why God allows opposites to attract is because it helps us be sanctified. because it teaches us that life is not about me. It's not about me. It's about the us. And it's about how can I sacrifice and how can I be the person that Christ wants me to be. James 1, 2 through 4. Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. You want there to be difficult times in your relationship because your faith and your sanctification grow as a result of that. Okay? Thanks for hanging in there with me. Can I pray for you? Rick, anything you need to say? These guys were good. We're back at 8:30 in the morning for breakfast. Okay? Let me pray for you. God, thank you for these fine folks. Thank you, God, for their attention. God, thank you for your word, which gives us the principles by which we can live our lives that would enable us to have the kind of marriages that you want us to have. I pray, God, that you allow our time to be fruitful and productive tomorrow. Give us a good night's rest tonight, and we want to honor you with everything that we do. In Jesus' name, amen. You guys have a great night.